Today, my 2 cents worth on the upcoming budget. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Welcome to this post covering finance and property news with a distinctively Australian flavour. Josh Frydenberg's March 29th budget, which is his 4th as Treasurer, is expected to reveal a big deficit for 2022-2023. Last December, it was estimated that the annual deficit would be around $99 billion, but the updated figures will probably show some improvement, perhaps lower by tens of billions of dollars, thanks to significantly higher income from wheat and oil and our other exports, including, of course, iron ore, and also the fact that more people are working than expected. But that said, we still have a structural deficit of close to $1 trillion. That's the aggregate amount that's added up over the last few years. And of course, the costs of that debt will rise as interest rates rise, so that's a problem. And the structural deficit is likely to continue because it comprises and is driven by a whole bunch of major spending programs like NDIS, Centrelink Payments, Medicare and Defence. And all of those, of course, are going up. And although the current year deficit will fall from the $99 billion as predicted, it is worth remembering that to date, the government's also promised to spend some additional $70 billion over a number of years on a range of programs, some with frankly dodgy motivations. Some might even think it's a pork barreling going on. And of course, it's not their money, but it's our money, so taxpayers are on the hook. Now, there will be some short-term relief to assist with the cost of living pressures, which according to recent surveys are driving household confidence levels significantly lower. Surging inflation expectations have seen weekly ANZ Roy Morgan consumer confidence indices plunge further into pessimistic territory, down 4.8% last week to its lowest level since October 2020, which was during Victoria's initial 14-week lockdown. Confidence, though, fell across all states and territories. Weekly inflation expectations rose 0.4 percentage points to 6% as petrol prices continued to surge. Its 4-week moving average rose 0.2 percentage points to 5.5%. Current financial conditions decreased by 5.4%, and future financial conditions fell by 4.6%. Both indices were at their lowest levels since July and April 2020, respectively. And the current economic conditions index declined for a 5th straight week, dropping by 8.5%, and that's its lowest since October 2020. But future economic conditions did buck the overall trend and increased by 1.1%. That said, though, the time to buy a major household item dropped by 6.9%, and inflation expectations rose another 0.4% to 6%. That's the highest reading in a decade. David Plank, the head of Australian economics at ANZ, said consumer confidence dropped 4.8% last week. It is now at its lowest since Victoria's second COVID wave in early September 2020. The continued rapid increases in petrol prices saw inflation expectations rise to 6%. Increasing petrol prices have had a sharp impact on households' confidence for both current and future financial conditions, with the two sum indices dropping 10.3% and 8.4% respectively over the last 2 weeks. And he says, "We noted last week that the weakness in consumer sentiment is at odds with the strength in employment and reflects pressure on household budgets as nominal wage growth lags the jump in inflation. The weakness in consumer confidence presents a growing near-term risk to the outlook for household spending." Now, of course, the government will be wanting to talk about the $250 billion savings that households are sitting on, thanks to COVID and government payments over the past couple of years. But as I've shown before, this is not equally spread across the population, and talking in general terms about household balance sheets are in good shape belays the truth that averages mask, and many households are really up against it as costs of living rise, and with the prospect of high interest rates ahead. And I also have a feeling that 250 billion may well be overstated. But Federal Treasurer Josh Frydenberg has said payments will be made across the country to help Australians pay for the rising cost of living amid petrol and grocery price hikes. The number one topic around the kitchen table in Australia is costs of living, and so there will be some relief in the budget, he said. Frydenberg added the cost of living relief would be temporary, targeted and proportionate to the challenge we face. We said we would be targeted in the supports that we provided, and that they will have a start date and they'll have a stop date, that there'll be a pathway in and there'll be a pathway out, he told reporters last week. We must be targeting in on the things that we do so we don't add to those inflationary pressures. The question, of course, is the quantum, because we've already got inflation threatening to break out, some would say as high as 5% ahead, which would lead to higher interest rates, which would lead to higher wages, which would be a good thing, but that leads to higher prices, and then you will get an upward spiral. A temporary cut to the excise tax on petrol and other fuels does appear on the cards, as it has already been announced in New Zealand and in the UK. And 7 News suggests Australia's pensioners are in line for a one-off $250 cash payment as part of the federal government's plan to soften the impact of the rising cost of living. Politicians have been reluctant to provide exact details of the payment, saying more would be revealed on budget night on March 29. The payment is not designed to be a stimulus, which is why it isn't likely to exceed $400, as that would threaten inflation and subsequently cause rising interest rates. 7 News understands the payments will be made into Aussie bank accounts within weeks ahead of the likely federal election in May, but they don't expect the cash splash to make much difference in voting outcomes. Voters often see these last-minute bonuses in the shadow of elections as acts of desperation. They'll gladly take the money, but still vote the way they intended. Now, it's understood the bonuses will be paid through existing government programs by an agency such as the ATO or Services Australia, so that funds can be deposited quickly and directly. And the Morrison government is expected to announce the payment officially on budget day. And Frydenberg may yet extend a tax break for low-income earners in his March 29 budget, as the government puts together a relief package for households facing heated cost of living pressures. The low and middle income tax offset, the LMITO, which provides tax relief of up to $1,080 a year, is actually due to end on June the 30th. Frydenberg has been reluctant to say whether this would be extended again, although he has pointed out taxpayers can still claim it when they do their tax return for this financial year. Australia Institute Chief Economist Richard Dennis said that if the LMITO was not extended in the budget this month, workers such as teachers, nurses and midwives would pay $1,080 more in tax. In contrast, the so-called Stage 3 tax cuts legislated to come into effect in 2024 would give a tax break to bank CEOs, surgeons and federal politicians worth $9,075, Dr. Dennis said. The Stage 3 tax cut would see those earning more than $200,000 raking in the biggest benefit, while those on less than $45,000 will receive nothing. How is it reasonable that a bank CEO earning $5.2 million a year will be given a $9,000 tax cut, while someone working in aged care or on the minimum wage receives nothing, Dr. Dennis said. The changes would mean someone earning $45,000 will pay the same marginal tax as someone paying $200,000. The Stage 3 plan not only fails the pub test, it's bad economics, he said. Low and middle income earners are more likely to spend their tax cut back into the economy, creating jobs and growth, while the highest income earners are more likely to stash the additional cash away. Now, there may well be other things announced in the budget, but nothing of substantive structural reform. This is all about short-term positioning ahead of the likely to be announced election. And I am pretty cynical that any of this is really going to make much difference, because the rate of inflation will continue to roar away, And the household pressures that are real for many households can only be alleviated at the margin. As the UK Treasurer recently said, they will do what they can do at the margins, but a lot of these issues are much more structural, and therefore there are limits to how far they can move. The same is true here, of course, and we have to expect that interest rates will rise ahead. So this is very much a political budget, and interestingly, it's likely that the Treasury will release figures when the election is announced that shows a more realistic view of what's going on in the economy. So even the budget numbers are also political. So it's worth bearing that in mind when you listen to what's going on Tuesday or read the reviews subsequently. This is mostly politics, very little economics. This is all about getting re-elected, nothing about long-term structural reform of the system. And overall, it's clear to me that the deficit, the $1 trillion deficit, is going to become a greater burden because there are no plans to reduce it. And the costs of servicing that debt will rise ahead because interest rates are going to rise. And yet, of course, the prospect is the only way to tackle it is to reduce spending. And the question is, will either side of politics want to do that? Well, maybe at the margins, yes. But nobody wants to talk about reducing spending on this side of the election. So very much this is going to be one side versus the other side of a stake in the ground. And that stake in the ground is, of course, election day. I'm afraid that all bets are off directly after. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.